Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm Bob Blum, and I am the head of the Urban Health Institute. And I just wanted, first of all, to welcome you all for coming to this session on redesigning East Baltimore. We have, I think, a really fantastic panel and an equally wonderful moderator, and I will turn it to him in a minute. I just wanted to draw to your attention a couple of things that are and will be coming up. One is that we have a small grants program that the Urban Health Institute sponsors. It is for research and for course development. And these grants require university and a community collaboration. And I mention this because it can be initiated by a student or a faculty member in conjunction with a community collaborator, or it can be initiated by a community agency with that collaboration. So we're going to, for anyone interested in these, we are going to be having an informational session tomorrow at 4 p.m. In room E4611 here in the School of Public Health. Today is the first of a symposium series that we will be holding this year. I just wanted to mention the second will be on February 2nd at 4:30, and it is going to kick off a series, a symposium series that we'll be doing over the winter and spring on race and research. And it is going to focus on both the history of research on the African American community, going back from colonial times to yesterday and today. It is going to be looking at how research is viewed by our neighbors and by our community, and why and what it would take for it to be viewed differently, and how we might get there. The initial leadoff speaker is Harriet Washington. Some of you may be familiar. I hope all of you will be. Ms. Washington is a journalist. She is also an ethicist, and she has written an extraordinary volume that I just finished entitled Medical Apartheid, and it traces the history of research on the African American community. And in speaking with her, she's based in New York, I was astounded by her depth of knowledge of Baltimore. She knows what has happened in this community going back 150 years. And it should be a really exciting session. We're going to be having community participants as reactors. So that'll be on February 2nd. For now, though, I wanted to turn it over to the moderator, Phil Leaf, who is the Senior Associate Director of the Urban Health Institute and a professor in the Department of Mental Health here in the School of Public Health.
Afternoon, everybody. This is actually going out on the internet, so after we have our sessions, we're going to have discussions. So if people would wait for the mic to get you so that both people in the room but also other people can hear you. So obviously when we schedule this session, we didn't really know that the stars would be lining up. And I think with the recent presidential election, with having a governor who's clearly intimately familiar with Baltimore City, with having a mayor who's really very much dedicated for revitalization of local communities, that we really have, the stars have lined up with everything except we're broke at the state level, the city level, and even at the national level. So although policies are probably going to be much more aligned, and I sort of, that clearly it's going to take us, all of us, to figure out how to be improving and working with folks in East Baltimore. That we're not going to have these huge monumental influxes of funds that are going to really deal with the number of people that are living in Baltimore, East Baltimore. That we have lots of things that you'll hear today, many of that have been going on for as long as 40 years, that have made very significant changes and improvements, but often a couple of blocks or a couple of neighborhoods. And I think what we're wanting to talk about today, and this is not a discussion that's beginning today and hopefully is not one that's going to end today, is really how do we come together? How do we find out what's working and support that? And how do we have this benefit as many people living in Baltimore and for this discussion, East Baltimore, as possible? Okay. Unfortunately, people in Baltimore and East Baltimore, we do come together. But we often only come together when something really bad's happened. And there actually are some people in this room, and there will actually be some people in these pictures. And this was a spontaneous outpouring after the Dawsons. This is not the organized part. This is the Saturday afterwards, where people came from all over the city to grieve, to pay their respects, to see what they could be doing, to hear what they could be doing, to hear particularly from the faith community about how we need to understand this. And some of you may be able to pick yourselves out of these pictures. There was also a very an organized response, where even more people came out. And there were a lot of things discussed about how horrible this is and how we wouldn't let this happen again and what would we be doing. And we had, a wide array of folks, both political and non-political and religious leaders, and the political leaders all came together. And I just want to acknowledge Senator McFadden, who, not just here, but when I first came to Baltimore 18 years ago, was one of the first people in terms of when we were creating the East Baltimore Mental Health Partnership, and said, we really need mental health services in schools. And he was a key supporter, and very much with both Congressman Cummings and Senator McFadden. I think very little would have even happened after the Dawsons if he really hadn't stepped up, if the congressman hadn't stepped up and brought in some federal funds. And I just want to really thank you, not just for that, but for all the work that you've been doing in Baltimore and East Baltimore over these years. So we come together, and we often come together. And you just have to drive around Baltimore. We don't, we've had losses now for 30, 40 years in Baltimore, in this nation, and often, increasingly, the people who are affected, the getting-togethers are not in the funeral homes. These are people who don't necessarily feel comfortable there. It's on the corners, on the streets. They're grieving because, particularly, they're young folks. They're 18-year-olds, 24-year-olds, 30-year-olds who were losing. And even thugs cry. I mean, there's a sense of loss in the city that, again, I think with this election, you really see a change in the way people are viewing what we can do and what we need to be doing. So again, I think the symposium, although it wasn't planned to correspond this way, we know that we can develop good things. This is the Dawson House, where a number of very good things are happening. This is actually just yesterday. Where Build, as you'll hear, is putting in some housing. And if you actually walk by today, the houses are no longer on the side. The houses are actually on the foundations. And fairly soon people will be moving into there. And so clearly things are changing very rapidly. You walk around and the predominant, even though it says cookies and groceries, you can sort of see how large the liquor sign is. Where people are making the money. Well, that store may not be there very much longer. Again, because of community efforts that are doing through the redevelopment. It's not just putting in housing. It's sort of how do we really restructure and improve the living environments. And you'll hear, I think, some of those things. And where we really need to be moving is not from sort of showing up and feeling good and having McGriff the crime dog sort of come together, because I don't think there are easy solutions. I mean, we in this United States and in Baltimore and East Baltimore didn't get in this with the loss of jobs over a long period of time and our school situations and other things, but the school situation is turning around. There are actually more children enrolled in Baltimore City now than last year, and that's for the first time in about 40 years. That there's an substantial increase in academic performance and reductions in suspensions and other things, that we really are doing these things. And again, what we need is not just building facilities that deal with keeping people out of trouble or dealing with those who are in trouble, but really improving assets and creating infrastructures. This is the Chance, which maybe you know on Gay Street, redevelopment that they've been doing. And there's just a lot of stuff that's going around the city. There's clearly a lot of work that needs to get done. Some of it can get refurbished somewhat. Some of what is likely to be new work. We have a lot of churches, and again, thinking of assets, we have a lot of foundations in East Baltimore. We have a lot of things that we can be relying on to build on. But this is literally next door to that church. We also have, you know, a lot of work to be done, and how we can come together and what kind of models, both in terms of economics, creating jobs, places for people to work, as well as people to shop. Elderly housing, we have a lot of older folks, and we're working on that. You know, that from the 40,000 square feet view, or this is the 8th floor over at Hampton House, you know, things sort of look like there's things that are going on, but you know, we have really high rates of health problems. And again, since we're in the School of Public Health right now, when we're talking about community redevelopment, we're not just talking about putting ill people in houses that are a little bit better and aren't falling apart and maybe don't have lead in them. We're talking about how do we support community redevelopment? How do we really deal with our youngest children as well as our elders? And in these things, you can sort of see the East Baltimore data has some of the lowest rates in Baltimore, which also then makes it some of the worst outcomes in the United States. And East Baltimore is a big place. It's not just the areas around Hopkins. There's a lot of areas that we're talking about that many people in this room have been working on. We have schools all over the city. We have violence. This is just one mapping. This is the arrests of people who have been identified as gang members. And in some of the neighborhoods, including the neighborhoods right around here, you can barely see the schools through the arrests. So when we're talking about redevelopment, we're talking about housing, making safe passages to schools, making opportunities so students get to school, achieve, are able to have work and employment, and those are all sort of issues. So what we're going to be focusing on today, and originally we were going to have 4 presentations of programs, and these are being presented in sort of an order that they've existed. So in East Baltimore, for more than almost 40 years now, the East Baltimore Community Corporation has been in existence. And Dr. Washington, unfortunately, her mother's having some surgery today, so she's unable to be with us. Although we're going to hear about some very recent activities from Baltimore United and Leadership Development. They've actually been in existence for almost, I think they just had their 30th anniversary over the winter, a great celebration. And we have Bishop Doug Miles, who's the clergy co-chair of BUILD. And BUILD has really, both in East Baltimore but in Baltimore, been in a long, you know, for 30 years really working and using a national model that's been proven effective both in Baltimore and other places. We have the Historic East Baltimore Community Action Committee, HEBCAP, Eb Sabatino, who's the executive director, and that's been around since, I think, '94. Working in a large area around East Baltimore. Then most recently, the East Baltimore Development Incorporated, EBDI. We're fortunate to have Jack Shannon here today with us. And since our new president is coming from the University of Pennsylvania, even though I think he probably just left before he got there as provost, hopefully you still have some connections back there who can link us in. So what we're going to do is have some presentations, and we decided to sort of do it in order of age first, in a good tradition in East Baltimore, letting the elders sort of lead us. Not in terms of age of the individuals, but in terms of age of the organization. So Bishop Miles, who both through his work with Build, through his being the chair of the Ministerial Alliance for a number of years, and a lot of work that his church is doing for supporting both young people and other people, I just really thanks for coming, Bishop Miles.
Good afternoon. I will probably be the only one who will not have a PowerPoint presentation. I'm from the generation just above that, and I'm still kind of illiterate when it comes to the new computer-generated programs. 45 years ago, this day, on a Tuesday or Wednesday, I would have been upstairs as a lab assistant when I was a sophomore at Dunbar High School. That's part of my connection to Johns Hopkins, plus I'm an alumnus of the Johns Hopkins University. So this is kind of a homecoming for me. It's just good to be here, to be among people who have an interest in what's going on in Baltimore and the future of Baltimore. BUILD, Baltimoreans United in Leadership Development, is actually a 31-year-old organization of 42 churches, 13 after-school program parent groups, and 2 or 3 community organizations. The organization came together in an effort to create the power necessary to create positive policy change within Baltimore City. And I say without hesitation that BUILD has been probably the most innovative community-oriented organization in the state of Maryland in the past 30 years. Out of our organization has come the term living wage, as we passed the first living wage legislation in the world. And now there are living wage ordinances in 165 localities throughout Maryland, throughout the nation. And just recently, London voted to have living wages at the 2012 Olympics. So we've been involved in those kinds of things. We've built the largest moderate income housing development in the state of Maryland, Sandtown. That project was created in the 90s, and we built over 700 moderate income housing units, where persons back in 1992 could buy one of those homes for, if they made as little as $14,000 a year. So over the years, the BUILD organization has been innovative in its impact in the city of Baltimore and throughout the nation. We come to East Baltimore in a kind of circuitous route, with kind of a circuitous route. We're a citywide organization. And back in 2001, we launched an anti-blight or blight removal campaign as a part of our citywide agenda. We found that blighted homes, abandoned properties, substandard housing were creating health problems for young people in the city of Baltimore. Hantavirus and asthma attacks were generated by rat droppings and mouse droppings in homes that were dilapidated and living in homes living next door to abandoned properties. And there were just so many abandoned properties surrounding our churches, and we said that if there was going to be change in Baltimore, it had to really occur in the neighborhoods. Our experience in Sandtown taught us that blight removal is the best form of crime prevention. When we created the housing in Sandtown in 1 year, there were 25 police calls in the Sandtown community. 2 blocks to the south, there were over 200 police calls. So we discovered that blight removal is also a form of crime removal by creating home ownership and people's investment in their community. We came to East Baltimore for 2 reasons. One, it was as we launched our blight removal campaign, we had several churches here on the east side, particularly in East Oliver, that had decided that instead of building their individual kingdoms, they would combine their resources to try to impact the community where they were located. They had accumulated more than $2 million worth of property among them, and they were willing to put that property up as a kind of investment in redeveloping East Oliver. Around that same time, the Dawson family tragedy occurred. And we decided as we launched our blight removal campaign that we would start in East Oliver as a symbol that we could take tragedy and turn it into triumph. And that's been the impetus of our involvement in East Oliver, our effort toward building 1,500 new homes in East Oliver for moderate income people. Along the road to that to that effort. In the 2003, I think it was, citywide election, we had all of those candidates who were running for president of the city council commit to that they would raise a $50,000 bond bill to help launch the effort in East Oliver. We got commitment out of everyone running for office, but as so often happened in the political arena, sometimes when people get elected, they get a little bit of amnesia. And we had to do some reminding and some reminding and some reminding until the then president of the city council, Sheila Dixon, committed to not only it was a $50 million bond, not a $50 million bond, but really to create a $100 million affordable housing trust fund that would be funded over the course of 5 years. And that affordable housing trust fund would be used to buy up dilapidated property, clear land, and prepare sites for developers to come in and do the kind of development that can be done in neighborhoods when land is available. It was not ever our intention that the entire $50 million would come to the BUILD organization, but that it would be used citywide by numerous groups, and there are numerous projects going on around the city right now that are beneficiaries of that affordable housing trust fund. In our effort toward rebuilding, we encountered a group called the Reinvestment Fund, who brought to Baltimore and to us, to the BUILD organization, a new way of looking at neighborhood redevelopment. In the past, it had been our experience, as we did with Sandtown, to go to one of the most distressed areas of the city, start building there, and hope for the best. In Sandtown, even though we've created 700 new homeowners, we have not really created a community, because many of the amenities necessary to make community whole are not there. So the Reinvestment Fund came to us with a different idea. They said, rather than going to the most distressed part of a community, you need to learn to build from strength. Hook up with the largest development, the largest asset in the community, and build out from that. In East Oliver, the largest facility, the largest effort was underway with the creation of the Biotech Park. And we decided that we would link our effort with that effort to build moderate income housing on the border of EBDI, to join with EBDI, and to build out from there into the more distressed areas of the East Oliver community. As we moved in that area, we were blessed with a patron saint out of the corporate community. As Tony Deering, the president of the Rouse Foundation, learned about what we were doing, fell in love with the idea of what we were doing, and the fact that the church was leading this effort. And that not only the church was leading the effort, but the church was willing to put its resources on the line to make this project a reality. He made the commitment that he would raise $10 million for us out of the corporate community, a corporate community that has not always been hospitable to those of us who live uptown. And Tony Deering has kept that commitment and has raised the $10 million of soft dollars needed to make this project go. Because of that $10 million, the liquor store that you saw in the slide, we were able to purchase the liquor store and the license. And we will do away with that because it's right smack dab in the middle of the area we're currently redeveloping. And we know that if there's a liquor store there, people will not want to live there. So that liquor store, in just a few weeks, will be history. Because it will belong to the BUILD organization, and we're not in the liquor business. We've made the commitment, and the first actual government dollars we got were from Senator Barbara Mikulski, who made a commitment of $600,000 toward our effort, and that money was to be used to help initiate the project. That money is in hand. It's being put to good use. And along with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, we've now actually begun construction. We've had 5 houses constructed, and in the midst of the financial collapse in this country, we had 5 new homeowners go to settlement, and they're now in their brand new homes. And I'm happy to report that one of those persons is a member of the Koinonia Church, a young family that had purchased one of those properties and is now in that home. Just this week, we've dropped in place 5 additional homes, and we already have those homes sold. So there's an interest in people moving back in the East Oliver community, and not just for the sake of East Oliver, but because they're getting a great property. How many here took the tour that was offered just before this and saw the homes there? Some outstanding homes for ridiculous prices. Depending upon income, you can get one of those homes for as little as $89,000 or $875 a month mortgage. Brand new housing, 3-story housing, modular homes, well-equipped, well-furnished with amenities for as little as $875 a month. And people are coming to us looking for those properties. So it's our overall intent that as this new day has dawned, we will in fact build 1,500 new homes in East Baltimore, that we will be a part of the recreation of a community that I came out of, that we will be a part of the rebirth of East Baltimore in a way that will complement what's going on in EBDI, will link to other projects we will have underway throughout the city, and that 10 to 15 years from now, those of you who are not from Baltimore, when you come back, you will not only want to visit the jewel that is the Inner Harbor, but somebody will say, let's go uptown to see what those folk at Build are doing in East Oliver and throughout the city. We've begun it, and as our new president has said, yes, we can.
Well, good afternoon. Again, my name is Ed Sabatino. I'm the Executive Director of Historic East Baltimore Community Action Coalition, which, for obvious reasons, we tend to refer to by its acronym, HEBCAC. And Bishop Miles, great comments. I'm sure glad I thought about doing a little bit more sort of factual type presentation instead of inspirational, or I would have just never stood a chance following up his thoughts. But it is a pleasure to be here and to be among a group of people in an institution that clearly understands what community development is about, sees it as a big priority, is a huge partner for the work that we do and other organizations do here in East Baltimore, and is willing to take time out to have these kind of discussions to sort of further our learnings and our knowledge of what it takes to help rebuild these neighborhoods. I'm going to do a couple of things in the 10 minutes or so that I'll speak. One is I'll give you just a little bit of background about our organization, but I'll make it pretty brief because I know that's not really the focus of what we're here for today. And then, with your indulgence here in just a second, I'll see if I can't fire up a couple of PowerPoint slides and try to follow the instructions I was given about talking a little bit about overall strategy, if you will. How do we as an organization think about the way in which we approach our community development work, if you will, outside of maybe any specific projects. And then we'll talk about a couple of specific projects examples and, if you will, try to match those back against our thoughts in terms of how you approach the work overall. So let me just, bet this is going to be real easy to do. Yep. Right there. And slideshow. Great. Thanks. So again, HEBCAC organization, as Phil said, we were formed back in 1994. We have a mission most simply defined as being about creating positive change, working with stakeholders, residents, businesses, any other stakeholders to help create healthier neighborhoods in the footprint that is HEBCAC's, and to help do things that create positive change in the lives of the people who live in those particular neighborhoods. And just as a point of reference, and for most of you I think these boundaries will make some sense. I apologize if you're not as familiar with the area without a map, but to give you some sense of what our geography is, the area that we primarily work in is defined by Fayette Street on the southern boundary, North Avenue on the north, the sort of Edison Highway corridor on the east side, and basically the Hopkins campus on the west side. An area, it's about 220 square blocks. It's maybe a mile and a half distance-wise, either on the east-west or the north-south axis. So in a lot of ways, it's a fairly compact area in terms of the complexity of the community development challenge. It at times feels like you're working in a pretty large geography. Home to maybe 23,000 folks. In its heyday, probably was home to maybe 40 or 42,000 individuals. We've got a staff of about 30 and run an organization with a budget of about $3 million. And we're housed just up the street, actually in a historic old manufacturing building at 1212 North Wolf Street. So first, let me start out. We kind of had a group discussion as I was putting these slides together. It's not often you get a chance to actually sit back and think overall strategy without necessarily relating it to a specific project. So what we did is we jotted down sort of 8 what we called guiding principles, which is what we like to think are what we try to stick by as we approach community development through any particular project or program. They are simple in nature in terms of writing them down. They're hideously complex to actually live out in practice on any consistent basis. And in many ways align with a lot of the thoughts that Bishop Miles shared with you just a couple of minutes ago. So there's nothing particularly magic about, I think, these ideas. But we see them as important touchstones in terms of helping make sure that we're driving our work in the way in which it's going to be sort of most beneficial primarily for the neighborhood, but also in a way that could be beneficial for our organization as well. I think the first point, sort of goes without saying. If you go into a neighborhood and you deal with physical infrastructure issues, and you rebuild houses, and you rebuild buildings, and you pave the streets, you may be engaging in what we would consider development, but you're certainly not engaging in what we would consider community development. So I think the combination of work both on the place side of things, the physical infrastructure, the things that you see, as well as a focus on the people issues, is the formula that I think really defines what I would consider community development to be about. And dealing with both of those things, especially in this market, is particularly difficult, but in some ways dealing with place or building issues, it sometimes can seem almost insanely simple compared to sometimes dealing with some of the people issues, which in a neighborhood like this are obviously difficult and complex. Bishop Miles said it beautifully relative to the notion of building from areas of strength. A classic mistake. Going into the neighborhood, and the first place that you try to attack is the weakest place in that neighborhood. It's tempting, but more often than not, unless you have an enormous amount of resources, it's a strategy that is more likely to fail than not. And I think when you talk about strength, you also have to think about it institutionally. And from an organizational perspective, when we ponder activity and projects, we always try to take a look at an honest assessment of what we have experience doing, what we think we're relatively good at. We try to make sure that we're working in that particular space before we jump off and try to do something new and different that we don't have any experience doing at all, and try to capitalize on the years of experience we have on things where we've been doing the work for some period of time. Leading into idea number 3, which is our strategy as an organization in order to try to keep yourself, if you will, lean and mean from a business perspective, is you try to figure out a way to work with anybody and everybody who's got the skill sets, the experience, and the resources you need in order to make a project come together and be successful. Sometimes that means you're working with people you don't always get along with, or that you have other disagreements with. And I think the true test here is your ability to put some of that stuff aside if you share a larger mission about positive impact in the neighborhood, and you find a way to work together. And the ability, I think, to work together for an organization like ours is key. Leveraging off other development energy. Again, not to put any more pressure on Jack Shannon's shoulders than there already is. There's a lot riding on the success of the work that he's doing in the new East Side project. And again, as Bishop Miles said, a lot of other projects are really teeing off the fact that the neighborhood being created there as it evolves is going to become an unbelievably healthy place, a place that spins off a lot of energy, and a place that's going to help make places that are close by to it have the potential for greater degrees of success down the road. And the idea of those things coming together and the energy in both directions flowing back and forth, I think, is what will make a larger redevelopment effort within East Baltimore possible. You've got to absolutely be committed to involvement, real and meaningful involvement from people who are affected by the work that you do. That's been key to the work that we've done. Again, I think you'll see that obviously characterizes the work of the other speakers here today. That's a practical consideration. Quite frankly, it's pretty hard to do work in these neighborhoods if you don't have people on your side. But hopefully it's a deeper, more philosophical approach as well that I think is key to making the work effective. Again, we're a smaller organization, and one of the things we always have to be conscious of is don't get in over your head. We look at potential project and program ideas from every angle that we can to make sure that it falls within a scope size range that we think as an organization we can handle and we can make successful. And especially in a market like we've got now, getting into something that's bigger than what you can actually make successful is pretty easy to do and can have some pretty major consequences for both the neighborhood and the organization. We like to employ the strategy of doing a big, intense, very focused project when we go into an area that creates a new area of strength that you can build outward from, and I'll talk about an example of that in a minute. And again, speaking a little bit more institutionally, this idea of risk-reward. Risk financially, risk politically, risk just relative to your ability to be successful. What does success look like? And what does it look like if you fail, both for your organization and for the neighborhood? And you got to make sure that you don't get into activities that, even if they're successful, are not going to really do all that much good. The ability to be successful is very difficult. Therefore, the downside of not being successful overweighs any positives that you have that you may get from the project. And again, for an organization that has limited resources, which in a lot, quite frankly, is probably any organization, no matter how big your budget is, you really have to be honest and realistic as you look at projects about sort of your ability to help them be successful. All driving towards, how do you write down the definition of what it's like to be successful in community development? And this is a little sentence that we've used before that we kind of conjured up once in a group discussion. Again, trying to marry the ideas of both people and place. Neighborhoods are great when they look nice, but neighborhoods aren't really successful unless they, what we say, sort of act effectively and act appropriately. And that's the social behavior and the social fabric and the people side of things, that you can create all the new housing in the world that you like, and if you don't deal with the underlying issues that the people who occupy that housing have and take advantage of the opportunities that they present, then the neighborhood, quite frankly, is just never going to be that successful. So a couple of quick examples of where those ideas sort of play out in our work. One of the biggest projects we've certainly done in a long time, one of the more recent ones, a building we just finished. It's up on 901 North Milton Avenue, just a couple of blocks from here, the new Weinberg Community Center. It was a historic building that we rehabbed. Again, we tried to play off of this anchor strategy. This was a several block area where there's not that much good going on. So we knew we probably had to go in with a big, fairly splashy project, hope that we were going to be successful, and then from that create an area of strength that we could begin to build outwards. We also, in the second bullet, realized that just fixing up the building wasn't going to do that much for the neighborhood, although it would be helpful. And so as we thought about filling the building with tenants, we tried to focus on organizations that could bring services that would help deal with some of the people issues that we face in that particular neighborhood. I like to think that we did a good job involving the people who live in that neighborhood, both in development and implementation of the strategy around putting this building back together, if you will. I see a very good friend of mine, Mitch Henderson, who's here in the crowd, who was an integral part of that committee and continues to be for the work that we do there. And quite frankly, without that group, we would have never gotten this project off the ground. And we had everybody involved. We had funders, both local and national. We had the residents I talked about. We had for-profit folks who helped us out because we hadn't done big building development in a while. We had funding from the city. We had funding from the state. Senator McFadden's here. Again, without his support down in Annapolis, money we needed wouldn't have been there. And I think we've been reasonably successful creating what we think will be a catalyst for some additional work that we're going to try to be able to do in that neighborhood. Of course, time will tell, but we're optimistic at this point. And the work that we hope this is a catalyst for is a little housing project. It's not that big. It's just a couple of blocks that surround that building where the housing is primarily vacant. Without the redevelopment of the anchor building at 901 North Milton Avenue, doing anything with the housing probably would have been impossible. So we go in, we build the anchor, we try to capitalize off that strength, we get our residents back involved to help us move the housing part of this project forward. We bring people back on board who have certain kinds of development experience maybe we don't have internally and don't feel there's a lot of value to us developing internally, or we can't develop it in time, and we go after funders just like we've done before, far and wide. And hopefully, if we're successful, when you walk through that neighborhood in 3 years, after you've taken your tour of Oliver and seen those beautiful 1,500 new houses that are there, you'll see a couple of blocks that both look and act completely differently than certainly they do now, and that would be a measure of success. And hopefully a market there where people who invest in that see it as a real estate investment that certainly is stable, if not obviously increasing over time, and they feel good about the life that they've created for they and their families in those particular blocks. I'll switch gears now. I'll get away from the place-based work and talk a little bit about people, because we're probably more active dealing with people issues, if you will, than we are with building issues. I'll highlight one specific program, primarily because it's one of the largest partnerships that we've ever had with yours truly right here at Johns Hopkins University, specifically our key partner, one of whom is here in the room, Darius Tandon, the Center for Adolescent Health, which is part of the Bloomberg School of Public Health, with a new mental health initiative that's part of our Youth Opportunities program that we've recently named Healthy Minds at Work. And YO, just so you know, is a program that works with out-of-school youth, age 16 to 21, all kids who've dropped out, getting them back connected with education, employment, job training, and work experience kinds of activities. Again, back to the idea that you got to deal with the people issues and not just the building stuff in these neighborhoods. The Healthy Minds at Work mental health initiative, an outgrowth, because we feel like we have pretty good track record working with young adults aged 16 to 21. And so we felt like expanding that particular program made a lot of sense institutionally. We talk about resident involvement, we talk about real estate project. Its analogy in a direct service program is what we call sort of peer-led activity. And both the Youth Opportunities Program, especially Healthy Minds at Work, have a huge peer-led component to them in which successful graduates of those particular programs, Youth Opportunities in particular, come back and work with current members as mentors and as teachers and as folks who help us, to put program design. And again, you reach out to a lot of different partners from the city and the state who bring a lot of expertise. Again, working in a direction of 400 or 500 kids right now, quite frankly, heading in a very bad direction, getting them reconnected with a direction in which they're heading towards a much more productive adult life. And as kids are going to take over and someday be at these panel discussions, they need to be ready for those roles of leadership. And this is a program that helps kids in the East Baltimore neighborhood do that. And last but not least, two other programs. One's Dee's Place that we do, which is a peer-led recovery support program. Drugs, substance abuse, obviously an enormous issue in the neighborhood. And a neighborhood services program which flips the direct service work a little bit and tries to focus on taking advantage of latent capacity, talent, and opportunity from people who live here, not just looking at this from sort of a deficit perspective, of supporting the ability of residents to get busy and active on their own blocks and in their own neighborhoods doing things that are going to make those neighborhoods better. The hope eventually would be that they wouldn't need an outside group like us. Who knows? There's probably always a place for some technical support, but that's the kind of thing that we try to do through that kind of program. So in closing, I would just say the only other thought I would share with you is, a key to community development for us is always making sure that you keep the two key things in the right hierarchy. It's got to be the neighborhood first and your organization and your collaboration second. You've got to be obsessed much more with creating a healthy neighborhood than necessarily having a healthy organization. The two do go hand in hand, but you just got to make it a priority that what's good for the organization or good for the neighborhood is ultimately going to be good for your organization. Thank you. There you go. Beautiful. Okay.
Is this one yours, or?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jack Shannon, and it's my honor to serve as the President and CEO of East Baltimore Development Incorporated, or EBDI. And just a little bit of background about EBDI. We've been around since 2002, fall of 2002, and I came here from Philadelphia and University of Pennsylvania back in March of 2003. We are a fairly young organization, and we actually do build upon the efforts of BUILD as well as HEPCAC and the work that we're doing. We're very mindful of the fact that many others, including many of you in this room, have been toiling in these fields much longer than my colleagues and I, and we're respectful of that and we are appreciative of that. A little bit about EBDI itself. We are an organization that was created as a result of discussions between the community, elected officials, Johns Hopkins, and others, after an initial plan came about to create the biopark, as Bishop Miles talked about previously. The problem with I think the original plan, much like a lot of plans that occur in urban neighborhoods, was that in the desire to leverage an asset, Johns Hopkins, and the desire to remove, as Bishop Miles described, all the terrible consequences associated with urban blight, we forgot about one thing, and that was about the fact that even though East Baltimore was a community that had significant disinvestment over time, significant vacancy levels approaching more than 70%, it was still the home to hundreds of residents who had lived here, had grown up here, married here, had their children or surgery or medical care provided at this hospital. And even though it may not have been the East Baltimore that they grew up with It may not have been the East Baltimore that block participated in the Afro's Clean Block contest back in the 50s. And it may not have been the American dream they bought into when they became homeowners in East Baltimore. It was still their home. And we paid a price for that. And we spent a lot of time, and to this day, we're still catching up from that. That said, we still try to do good work, and we're mindful of that history. We try to respect that history, but we also try to focus on the present, and even more importantly, on ensuring a brighter future for East Baltimore and for all who live, work, and are educated in this community. So with that in mind, our mission is pretty basic. It's to bring market-oriented investment to East Baltimore. And we say market-oriented, not to exclude the great contribution made by government in this area or the institutional investment made by Johns Hopkins and others. But if you're really going to have a strong community, you have to have private investment. And you've got to create a marketplace, more so now than ever in today's environment, where people can get a reasonable return on investment for the investment they're making. And I'm not talking about just big developers. I'm talking about homeowners. Take this for consideration, if you will. A lot of families moved in East Baltimore in the 1990s as part of inducements to encourage home ownership in this community. They were largely first-time home buyers. They bought houses that were $150,000 to develop or rehab. They bought them for $60,000. That sounds like a good deal, except for the fact that there wasn't anybody else buying in the community. There wasn't anybody when mom and dad passed away coming and rehabilitating that home. There weren't any longer doctors and nurses, lab techs, security officers, and others from Johns Hopkins and the city and Kennedy Krieger moving into this community. So by the time EBDI came along, we had that 70% vacancy rate, and those homeowners, long before we heard anything about upside-down mortgages or properties being underwater, were holding on to properties that had mortgages of still $60,000 and a valuation of $30,000. Those folks bought thinking they were buying into the American dream, and they bought into a nightmare. And that's something we need to make sure that we don't repeat as we go forward, and that's why it's encouraging and absolutely critical that we build upon each other's strengths here. The second piece of this was equipping community residents with what they needed to be fully benefiting from the work that we're doing. And that's been a long and ongoing dialogue. We do it individually, one-on-one, through the work of our family advocates. One of our former family advocates, Barbara Bates Hopkins, is here this evening. She now works at Johns Hopkins doing similar work in the community. But it's also large meetings and contextual meetings and meetings about everything from economic inclusion to relocation benefits to just how do you do the work in the community. But if longtime residents as well as new residents don't benefit from the work we're doing, as Ed Sabatino noted, it's nice to build buildings, it's great to build new facilities, but without having that human engagement and that return on investment, the work we're doing really is not that important. And then lastly, we need to leverage this institution, Johns Hopkins. It was referenced earlier by Phil Leaf that I came from the University of Pennsylvania. Penn was always number 2 in NIH research. It was always below number 1 in terms of health systems and hospitals, and we always looked up to the work that Johns Hopkins did. And the legacy of Johns Hopkins, the founder of this hospital, was to provide care for this community, and it was to provide accessibility to this community. And those who followed in the footsteps of Mr. Hopkins also were very mindful of the need and the requirement for the medical profession to provide service to the community. That remains, I believe sincerely, the mission of this institution. Over time, though, like all relationships, be they between a town and a gown, husband and wife, parents and children or siblings, relationships have ups and downs. And that's true with this community and Johns Hopkins as well. But under the leadership of President Brody, and I believe it's going to continue under President Daniel, that there is a new day that's dawned here in East Baltimore, that there is greater cooperation. We got to be mindful of the history. We got to make sure we don't make those same mistakes as we did in the past. But please, I'm hopeful that we're not completely imprisoned and captive to that history, because if all you go back is repeating what was happening in the past, you just become trapped in that and you're never able to move forward. And that's why we believe that working with Johns Hopkins is a critical component of our success. I think it's fair to say we wouldn't be doing what we're doing if this was a greenfield somewhere in Harford County. We have lots of partnerships. As you can see, EBDI purposefully is in the middle of all these foundations, private sector and governmental partners. We're very, very blessed that we enjoy federal support with the help of Senator Mikulski, Senator Cardin, as well as Congressman Cummings, who's been very, very engaged in the work we're doing. At the state level, we have not only Governor O'Malley, but Lieutenant Governor Brown sits on our board, and then the local delegation headed up by Senator McFadden has done wonderful work providing us resources but keeping us honest as well. And then last but certainly not least, on a local level, we've enjoyed support first as council president and later as mayor from Sheila Dixon, along with our two local council members, Jack Young, along with Warren Branch, and Councilman Branch is represented by Glenn Ross, a longtime community activist, as well as community resident and supporter of all things good in this community, and sometimes a supporter of EBDI when we do good. Not always, but sometimes. You're mindful of the fact that we are in the middle of all this. We do have representation from the community as well as Johns Hopkins on our board. We have 2 community representatives and 2 from Hopkins. That's by design, so that each had parity there. It wasn't until recently we had community residents actually on the board. Made a mistake. You know, I'm be honest with you, we had folks who were community representatives, but they weren't from the community, and that is not the way to go about this. But I think we've learned from that mistake, and I think we're doing much better work. Being in the middle, make sure that things get done. Being in the middle, make sure that you hear everybody's point of view. We also make sure that everybody puts their self-interest on the table, because even Johns Hopkins community members and foundations, albeit charitable ones, all have self-interest. And it's critically important when you're doing the kind of work that Bishop Miles, Ed Sabatino, and I are doing, that people are honest about their self-interest. They don't put a self-interest on the table, they don't stay around the table, because when times get tough, and they will, they'll find themselves moving on to some other project. Probably the best thing I can describe my job as being in the middle of everything is that I was prepared for it, coming from a very large and incredibly dysfunctional Irish family, where one day you're loved, and next day you're hated, and then the third day you're somewhere in between, and nobody remembers anything except to harbor grudges that date back 20, 30 years ago. EBDI is not just a real estate organization. As you can see, we work in 4 discrete areas, but they're all coordinated. This is based upon a holistic and comprehensive approach that's very important to the work we're doing. You heard from the other speakers that they're doing exactly the same thing. So we focus on community development, economic development, human development, and real estate development. For those of you, just to provide context, we work in an area that's close to Johns Hopkins, obviously, but also we point out the fact that we're close to Fells Point and Harbor East because we've seen energy moving up that Broadway corridor, the Inner Harbor and downtown, but at the same time, we're also mindful as we work within the area bounded by Madison Street, the railroad tracks of Amtrak and the Mark Penn Line, Broadway and Patterson Park Avenue, that we need to work closely with the organizations and individuals working in Collington Square, working in Oliver, Madison Square, Monument and McElderry, and even, I would add, communities beyond that. Recently, you might have read in the Baltimore Sun interesting set of articles about the Bel Air Edison neighborhood and about the perceived impact of what's happening in EBDI upon those communities. They weren't right, but they had legitimate concerns in the residents of that community. And we sat down, and now we're partnering with them, realizing that if we can partner together, even though they may not be geographically adjacent to EBDI, we can find some ways to benefit and strengthen those communities, which are important. If all we do is work within the EBDI 35 block, 88 acre footprint and do nothing more, then we will create some opportunities, but we really will not have leveraged all the opportunities we have in front of us. Just to give you a scope of our activities, we're looking to develop and have already begun 2,200 units of mixed income housing, 2 million square feet of life science space. which will generate upwards of 8,000 new job opportunities, and we're focused on contracting as well as workforce development to ensure that minorities, women, and local residents and businesses capture a substantial portion of those opportunities. We talked earlier, Bishop Miles, about his experience in West Baltimore. Housing is a piece of it, but without stores, without services, without all the things that make a community strong, we're not going to be successful. So all of our buildings in the commercial side have ground floor retail, and we're working right now to bring a 35,000 square foot grocery market to East Baltimore that would be located 2 blocks to the north of this campus. A community school campus, which I'll talk about in a second, along with intermodal transit. And then finally, new parks. We had lots of green space. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Lots of open space in East Baltimore. They were the sites of former vacant buildings. We did not have a network of green space. And what we're trying to do is to turn it around and create the green space that we all love and deserve, and that will benefit those who work here, those who study here, as well as those who live in this community. Talked earlier about the need for us to leverage the meds and eds opportunity, and that's absolutely critically important. And this is something that, once again, we're building from assets. We are very fortunate to be next to Johns Hopkins. You see all the stats. You're familiar with them. But that's critically important, as Bishop Miles and Ed Sabatino noted, that we build from strengths and stop playing this game that it's Hopkins versus the community or government versus Hopkins or whatever. You know, to quote one of my daughter's favorite movies these days, High School Musical 1, 2, or 3, I forget which one it's from, but, you know, we're all in this together, and the sooner we figure that out, the better off we're all going to be. We also are looking to develop high-quality mixed-income housing, and in a challenging environment. This is not an area that was easy to work in beginning with 5 years ago, and in light of the recent mortgage meltdown, it's become much more difficult. But as Bishop Miles has indicated, there are opportunities for home ownership. If we create them and we prepare folks for them and provide them with strong communities, they will buy in East Baltimore. I'm confident of that, as has been proven by the experience of Bill and Oliver. So we want to build an economically and socially diverse community. What that means is people of various incomes, people who have choices living in this community, as well as those who may not have all the same economic resources, having the opportunities to have quality housing. That also means graduate students and Hopkins employees, because I'm told by longtime residents that when this community was at its strongest, it's when Hopkins employees and students lived in the community alongside others. And that's critically important for the future of East Baltimore. We want to make sure that we've got equity wealth that goes across generations. Still, even in spite of the example I gave you earlier, one of the best and greatest ways for generations to secure and maintain wealth is through home ownership. We unfortunately had to relocate families in the first phase of our work. And that was a very difficult choice that was made by those who were involved with the project at both the governmental and EBDI level. And it's one that we hope we never have to make again, because as Bishop Miles is working in Oliver to strengthen that community, we don't want to see eminent domain and urban renewal used in the future. But if we have to do it, I think we've done it in an equitable manner. It's been contentious at times, working with local community organizations who rightfully so have pushed back at every corner in the work we're doing. But I think that we have become a model, and those families who have moved out have the right of first return. We're providing resources. And if those of you went on the tour, saw those first 2 buildings that are already open, we're pleased that East Baltimore residents comprise more than half of the residents in those 2 buildings. And we look forward to similar results when it comes to home ownership. And then lastly, we've got to respect that historic nature of East Baltimore, but provide some new options, because one of the problems is we got lots of row houses in East Baltimore. People, not everyone likes a row house. They like lofts, they like apartments, they like having parking garages out back, and we got to provide that as well. As you can see, we're focused on 60% home ownership, 40% rental, bringing the rental under control and centralized management and really good quality housing, and then having a mix between low income, market rate, and workforce for families making between $35,000 and $100,000 for a family of 4, Folks that are getting priced out of the market might have to go out to Baltimore County and beyond to find affordable housing that's also quality housing. But those are the kind of folks that make communities strong, and we want to make sure that they're here. We're also, as I said earlier, focused on workforce development. That's around things like making sure that jobs are created in the life sciences park are connected to residents, construction trades as well. Great partnership we have with the Mayor's Office of Employment Development for a pipeline of workforce opportunities beyond Johns Hopkins and beyond the Life Sciences Park to UPS, the airport, all the opportunities we're connecting East Baltimore residents because East Baltimore residents want to work. They're like everybody else. They just haven't had access. In some cases, maybe they've had a few challenges. In other cases, maybe they haven't had the same set of educational opportunities that most of us have been able to enjoy. Our problem is we need to find, in this challenging resource environment that Phil Leaf talked about, additional resources to take these programs up to scale. Perhaps something more important that we're going to do at EBDI is greater than the work we're doing with Bob Blum, Jody Schaefer, and others here at Johns Hopkins, along with the city, the state, and Dr. Alonzo and his colleagues at the Baltimore City Public School System. And that's the creation of a new pre-K to 8 community school campus that will also contain a family resource center, which is being supported by the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation. Working with Dr. Blum and his colleagues, it will ensure that we have health services integrated in the facilities, delivering services not just to students, but to their families, and also recreational, cultural, and after-school and extended day learning programs as well. And I would also add, it's not just about the new school. Working with 4 other community schools, Dunbar Middle, Collington Square, Tench Tillman, and Rayner Brown, we're going to deliver integrated services and extended day learning programs that will impact over 1,000 students. It's a beginning. It's not all throughout the city of Baltimore. We hope we become a model, but it's beyond the project area, once again, that will support the surrounding communities as well. You can see that this building and complex will be developed on a site north of St. Wenceslas Church, which is a beautiful church and complex there that we're bringing the Maryland Institute and College of Art to bring some of their programs into the former school there. And it will become a model, not just for East Baltimore, but my own experience at the University of Pennsylvania, where we did a similar community school, meaning it's for the community with a catchment area, as well as the right for relocated residents to send their children here, is that it became a model in Philadelphia, the work we did at Penn, for 20 new schools to be built citywide. And the importance of this school is that there has not been a new elementary school built in the city of Baltimore in 30-plus years. Talk about us not having our priorities together as a country. And I think we, working collaboratively with everybody, can set an example and move forward with similar developments elsewhere. Last thing that we're working on is transit, because you got to connect folks with jobs. And coming from Philadelphia, I got to tell you, when I was told that we had a subway here in the city of Baltimore, and I actually took a ride on it, I was somewhat underwhelmed. But there's an opportunity there. I have to say that, you know, growing up Irish Catholic, every challenge is an opportunity. That glass of whiskey might be half full, but it's also half empty and vice versa. So we are working right now to take that northern border that we have, which is the Amtrak Mark Penn line, and create a brand new transit station there that will generate opportunities for the new residents who are moving into our community, but also into those homes that Bishop Miles is building, and go to jobs at Aberdeen as well as BWI and down to Washington, D.C., and also allow folks to have the opportunity to leave their cars at home and connect to the employment opportunities that exist here at Johns Hopkins along at Kennedy Krieger. I think what's really cool about this is that we finally have the opportunity in the city of Baltimore to have a train station linked with the 17 bus lines that service the East Baltimore project area, and eventually, if not in my lifetime, maybe the lifetime of my 13-year-old daughter, the Green Line extension, all to be connected together so that you can take all those forms of mass transit without having to walk blocks on end to get to them. And even more importantly, by literally jumping the tracks, we open up a whole new host of opportunities up the Gay Street corridor, across Broadway, and take those surrounding communities that have many of the same challenges that EBDI confronted at the very beginning, and have the opportunity to build upon the strength that we're creating within the project area and to also connect to the strong market neighborhoods that exist in Northeast Baltimore. There you can see a representation of the station and the idea that we'd have further development on the former city transportation line. And wouldn't it be great, as a Baltimorean, I always tell myself, for folks who ride the Northeast Corridor service every day and who never get to see the Inner Harbor, to see that vision that Bishop Miles talked about of a new East Baltimore, where instead of blight, they see job creation, schools, green areas, all the things that we can be proud of, and that they can say something great is happening here. Real quickly, I want to just take you through where we started. As I said earlier, we had 70% vacancy rate. First 31 acres had a market valuation of $4 million. Everything you wanted to be high in terms of averages, household income levels, educational attainment, we were below city and regional and national averages. Everything you wanted to be low in, we were unfortunately high. And as I mentioned earlier, it's that interesting and long and very complex town-gown relationship. We've acquired 916 properties. We've taken them and assembled them, attracted a private developer who is now putting $850 million into that same area that 5 years ago had a market investment of $4 million. We've already completed the first building of Life Science and Technology Park, creating 1,000 new jobs in that building over time. And we're also now on our way with that new housing, starting with seniors, to the point that was made earlier by by Dr. Leaf, was that we respected the elders because the community said start with senior housing in the work we're doing. And then we've moved on the workforce, and now we're beginning home ownership, including a great green rehab program where houses will be available come this spring for those of you who are interested. And with that new program Johns Hopkins has done with the Live Near Your Work, it really becomes attractive for us, along with those who want to buy the units that Build is building. I just want to close with the following thoughts that Congressman Cummings, when I first came to town, sat me down, and for those of you who know Congressman Cummings, he very well could have been in the same line of work as Bishop Miles. He's a very, very convincing man. He's a very, very forceful speaker. And what he said to me was, and he also never uses my first name, it's always Shannon. So he said, Shannon, I want you to be aware, you're from Philadelphia. You need to understand a little bit of history here. What you're about to undertake is the largest project the city has ever seen. It's bigger than the Inner Harbor. But you also have to understand that the hopes and aspirations of a lot of folks are riding on this one. Because that Inner Harbor's nice. A lot of good people worked on it. But you know, Shannon, people who look like me didn't benefit from that project. Folks who lived in this city didn't benefit from that project. It's great for tourists. It started the Baltimore Renaissance. But this project has to do more. We've got a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I say that as someone who is now a Baltimorean, but I also recognize that I could live here for another 30 years in the city, and I will never, ever be a Baltimorean, but that's a different story. But I think that I would also remind us, as we have that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, that individual residents and families who are impacted by the work that we are collectively doing in this room are depending upon us. And at the same time, the eyes of the nation are upon us, because the work that we're doing, Build and HEBCAC, Johns Hopkins, EBDI, and many others, is becoming a national model. I've had folks from New Orleans, Atlanta, Camden, New Jersey, Mobile, Alabama, all around the country coming, wanting to know what's happening here in Baltimore. As Bishop Miles said, yes, we can. I believe that. But I would just add two other things. Not only can we, but we must do this well. And I believe that we can continue, it's not going to be an easy process, to keep that large table together. We will see a brighter day for East Baltimore. And I think it's going to be a national model that individual residents and leaders can be proud of as well. Thank you.
So in many ways, I think the speakers really did achieve one of the things that we hoped, which was that the activities that are going on in East Baltimore and Baltimore really are more than the sum of the parts, and that often we think about individual projects, we think about, one project that's going on or one neighborhood, and it's clear that we're really going to succeed only if we get some synergy, and not just with the development programs, but with interfaces with the schools, interfaces with the opportunities that Johns Hopkins is creating, the greater workforce opportunities. And so what we'd like to do is continue this discussion. I don't know if people have questions. We have some people, Senator McFadden.
Dr. Leaf, first, thank you and the Bloomberg School for putting this on. I want to thank Bishop Miles, Ed Sabatino, and Jack Shannon. Your organizations play a pivotal role in what we've been trying to do over the years. Dew Burns would be very happy. I do want to acknowledge the presence of the lady that really put a lot of effort into this and kind of helped us along and to get us here, and that's Paula Johnson Brandt, City Council person. Paula's over there to my right. She's been retired for a while. She's out in the private sector. But Paula, along with Dr. Marie Washington and several others, did some extensive negotiations with then Mayor Martin O'Malley, the leadership at Johns Hopkins, and in bringing us to this point. We're very fortunate. Again, Dew Burns and Bob Douglas and Lucille Gorham, I could just start calling all the names who said, we're going to stay, we're going to live in East Baltimore, and we're going to bring it back. So again, Bishop, thank you. Ed, thank you. Jack, thank you. We have a lot of work to do, and I'm glad that it's not only infrastructure, but you're talking about redeveloping people and their families. And yes, Bishop Miles, yes, we can. Yes, we will. And this will be a national model and create this synergy that really develops all of the city of Baltimore and those neighborhoods in the surrounding counties who unfortunately may be experiencing some of the same things again, but the model would have been in place. I deeply appreciate the contributions of the Hopkins community to this effort, and we in government will continue to support. We can't do everything, but certainly those things that represented by the three gentlemen here, and Dr. Washington, because she has to take care of her mother, have always been important to us in the political world. And then those of us who, for many, many years, Doug knows this, have been in the vineyards in East Baltimore. So I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mitch Henderson. I'm a product of East Baltimore. I was born and raised in East Baltimore. I'm super proud of what's going on with John Hopkins and this organization. And I'm especially proud of Mr. Ed Sabatino with the kind of things that he's doing for our neighborhood. Before he came into the neighborhood, we was just sitting there. Thanks again, Ed, for what you're doing. I have a great concern because we have a lot of areas in our neighborhood that need to be addressed, and Mr. Chandler somewhere along the line is going to help us to address those areas. But I just want to say the type of job that's being done, I'm proud to be part of it. I'm proud to be part of it, and I want to be part of that big picture. Everything is starting to happen. All the beauty around Hopkins is starting to flourish. I lived in Hopkins for years, lived in the Hopkins area, 800 block of Central Avenue. That's where I was raised up as a boy. So I can see the difference that's going on now. And again, I say thank you, especially to Mr. Sabatino, for what you have done for our neighborhood. Thanks again. And thanks to all three gentlemen. Thank you.
And just as I was taking some of the pictures yesterday over at the East Oliver community, actually somebody walked up and wondered how could they actually apply for one of the houses. Somebody who who had grown up in East Baltimore, had gone to Dunbar and middle school and city, but wanted to be moving back into the community. Was employed, his children had grown and wanted to be thinking about really spending the next 30 or 40 years of his life in East Baltimore. So I think people are getting very excited about these things.
Hello, my name is Kenneth Gallagher. I moved here 3 years ago to the Butchers Hill area, and I've noticed there is a lot of growing enthusiasm for development in this area. I'm seeing that on the ground. But what I'd like to ask is, especially to Mr. Shannon, to the panel in general, especially Mr. Shannon, what do you see as the engines, as the drivers of job creation and business growth in this area?
Well, first is Johns Hopkins. When we take a look at it, there are a number of jobs here that consistently remain unfilled, and that there's the opportunity for local residents to connect them with those jobs, and also with the opportunity for us to create career paths through organizations such as the Healthcare Alliance here in the city of Baltimore, so that when folks come in, they aren't just looking at an entry-level position, but the opportunity to move up within the organization. Beyond that, the life science and technology part, what we're seeing is a convergence right now around information technology and biotechnology, and that more and more we're seeing the absence of the fume hoods and all the heavy biological and chemical infrastructure that you needed to have in the past, and more around IT. And so the companies that are coming in are tending to be organizations that have this new convergence. We also have the opportunity to take and leverage new technologies coming out of Johns Hopkins through technology transfer and commercialization. That's not been one of the strong suits, ironically, for Johns Hopkins up until recently. Even though it's #1 in NIH funding, it has not had the same success as MIT or Stanford has had in those two institutions. We also view this opportunity around the mass transit-oriented development, that there'll be the opportunity to have new office space adjacent to that train station, that we think we can accommodate about another 1 million square feet of space there, and that will help us on the long term. Last but not least, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that EBDI has gotten LEED certification as a green community for the overall development plan that we're doing in East Baltimore. And more, we're seeing attractive options around green certification. And that's in terms of the opportunities to build green, which I think is going to be an emerging growth area for us, and we've got to tie our construction jobs to that. But it's also the ability for us to take what was one of the most historically health-challenged communities and turn it around and make sure that it's one of the most healthy. And so the green rehabs we're doing have a number of green components that are going to take rehab homes, which previously may have had issues with lead or other issues causing asthma and other health conditions for families, and turn it around into a green set of circumstances that will market this community and make it more attractive in the long term. I think overall, if you have those pieces together, then you start seeing groceries come in. You start seeing retail, you start seeing small shops and technology businesses coming in, because it's a safe place to live, it's an attractive place to live, and it's a leading edge place to live. And I think if you tie all those together, once again leveraging Johns Hopkins, which is a great asset to have in the beginning to work from, we'll see growth in this part. And it's the same thing that's happening on the west side of town, as well as around the University of Maryland and Baltimore. And it's something that Senator McFadden, the state legislature, along with Governor O'Malley, has made a priority. So that's the other important thing here. If we were doing this in isolation, that's great. But we're now seeing alignment, even though the resources may not be here right now, at the state policy level as well, to sustain and grow this over time.
And I think that just as important are a couple other things. One is matching residents with the existing job opportunities. And a great part of that is going to be the need for the corporate community of Baltimore to get in the frame of reference, a frame of mind of being able to forgive ex-felons for crimes committed years and years ago and persons who have straightened out their lives. Along with that is the need to better transportation to get residents in Baltimore to existing jobs in outlying areas of the city. And the last piece is looking at the ancillary development around the east-west developments. There are going to be any number of new businesses there, and people in the city ought to have opportunity to create some of those businesses. If you have a biotech lab, somebody's got to clean them, and that's going to take specialized cleaning. And who's going to clean them? Are we going to import people from outside of Maryland, or are we going to train people in Maryland to do those kind of services?
And I know Dr. Washington and the whole issue of creating these green jobs and the youth, we talked about the Yoast centers in terms of getting people capable of work and then having a whole range of jobs that people can be employed in that are well-paying jobs that are not going to get shipped out, and the whole issue of sort of making both Baltimore in general, not just our new construction in East Baltimore, but in general green and the whole area of Maryland, and certainly something that Dr. Alonzo and the school system, as we get more and more people returning to school. And part of the increase in the employment of the education enrollment is the number of young people who now are, after being out for a period of time, are saying, I really need to get back and get my education. And some of them aren't, even though they've been out of school for a while, they're still only 15, 16, 17 years old. So they're still going back to a school, but they often have a child themselves. And so creating, again, these educational opportunities where people can have employment opportunities in addition to having educational opportunities. So we're not just thinking about traditional, going from 8:30 to 2:30, but a full range of after-school opportunities, evening opportunities, Saturday opportunities, which hopefully will also have some work opportunities, because, again, many of the people living in East Baltimore also need jobs and need employment, and part of what was driving them out of school was the lack of income. So again, the synergy of the employment, the development, the educational opportunities, the health, the substance abuse treatment that was mentioned by Ed being available and keeping people in recovery and clean and sober, not just getting them clean and sober, but keeping them clean and sober, are all things that the community-based programs are really very interested in.
I'm a student here. I've been a student here for several years now, about as long as Mr. Shannon has been in Baltimore, here at the School of Public Health. So it's been a long time. And I'd like to open this question up to everybody, including Professor Leaf and Professor Blum, because I think we've taken a turn from some of the place-based conversation that's been a large part of this evening, this afternoon, to more of a people-based focus, as Mr. Sabatino was saying earlier. And I had a chance to ask a similar question to President Brody a few weeks ago, and I'll ask it to all of you. President Brody's response to my question about what he saw as the role of Hopkins as the East Side is quote-unquote redesigned was that Hopkins was the anchor tenant, not just for the East Side, but for the city. And I think we're hearing a lot about Hopkins' economic role in providing jobs, in providing money for different organizations. But what I'd like to hear everybody here speak about, especially vis-a-vis redesigning the East Side, the expertise that we have here in terms of academic expertise, in terms of interventions and the history of those. Going back to what Professor Blum mentioned earlier, a lot of the history of this is research on the African American community in East Baltimore. And I'm wondering what you see as Hopkins' role doing research for the African American population in East Baltimore as this redesigned East Side comes online. Because I think there's a real risk that the people who live here now, live around the Piano area, live in East Oliver, live in the areas that HEBCAC is targeting in the Fayette-Linwood area and their redevelopment plans there, that there's a real risk that there's not a lot of attention to what's going on besides green housing and getting lead out and building a school, but who is actually going to be still around here from these communities, and specifically what Hopkins' role is, whether it's the School of Public Health, the hospital, the School of Medicine, the School of Nursing, Homewood. And so I'm hoping that all of you can sort of, in the ideal case, outside of investment in buildings, outside of creation of jobs, what do you see as Hopkins' role in helping this community achieve the most it can out of the redevelopment? Thanks.
Yeah, I guess I'll take a quick shot. It's a great question. The first reaction I would have is, if you had to make a choice between access to Hopkins money and access to Hopkins people, that for me it would be a no-brainer. I mean, the resources you have as a collection of individuals, from students to faculty to academic leaders, so outweighs even the most enormous amount of money that you could ever spend in this neighborhood, that's where the real opportunity lies. I don't want to diminish the role of cash, if you will, because obviously everybody knows that's got its role to play, but it's you know, I go back and forth in a job like mine between underestimating and overestimating what that contribution is. It's difficult to get a handle on because, as is typical of a university, most things tend to be decentralized, and efforts from one school and another school don't always tend to be connected. Therefore, information isn't aggregated about everything that folks are doing, although I know that there's some work at the university to try to do that. But we see it certainly in many of the things that we do, is the ability to take advantage of what the people here at Hopkins have to offer is absolutely critical to our work. Whether it's at the board table where we have 2 seats reserved for Hopkins executives, or it's a graduate marketing class that right now is doing a business plan for the new little computer store that we just opened down in Monument Street to students who come in to tutor out-of-school youth through our Youth Opportunities program. It's everywhere in everything we do, and quite frankly, we can never have enough of it, and it's our job to be creative in terms of coming up with productive ways for students and faculty to make a contribution to our organization and therefore to the neighborhood. But I think it's the unlimited resource, and it's really the holy grail of what we got to work with here in this neighborhood.
I would say the role of Hopkins would be to model the behavior that ought to be expected of every corporate and foundation and government partner in the city of Baltimore. To model the kind of interest and input into neighborhoods that should be expected of every corporate leader within the Baltimore community, and that includes in terms of resources. Dr. Blum and I are going to be heading the effort next year for the youth employment opportunity, summer employment and year-round employment effort of the city, and Hopkins has to take the leadership role in those kind of things and then use its influence in the city, its bully pulpit, to say to the rest of corporate Baltimore that is not in line with where they ought to be in terms of their investments back into the city. Get in line. This is where you ought to be. This is where we need to be if this city is going to be whole.
I'm actually pretty fortunate because I can answer your question based upon very, very recent and concrete examples of the work that's being done by lots of really great people here at Johns Hopkins. One example being the work that I talked earlier about around that new community school. For 4 years now, Dr. Blum, Jody Schaefer, Tina Chang, and many, many others from Johns Hopkins have been working shoulder to shoulder with folks from the city of Baltimore, the Baltimore City Public School System, local residents, local educators, really just coming up with, I think, when we unveil this next year, once we have the funding, and we're very close to that, an incredibly exciting and innovative opportunity around integrated services in schools that connects across schools, that takes the services that are being provided by not just Johns Hopkins, but Baltimore Medical Systems and the City Department of Health, and delivers them in a way that meets and addresses the needs of individual residents, leverages those relationships, and creates something that's greater right now than the individual work that might be done by those 3 separate entities. I'm always struck by the fact that, having spent time at Penn, just how complex these relationships are between town and gown. And I've been on the other side as an administrator at the University of Pennsylvania. And yes, Penn had lots of money, but Penn's core mission originally was to provide for the education of students and provide for the services in the area of medical care. And when we first started doing the work that we did in West Philadelphia, the first response we got from students and faculty members and trustees, among some, was, why are we diverting resources to the community? Because that might mean something less in the way of what I can do as a faculty member, or less that's available to us as students, or as trustees, not going back to the core mission. And we spent a lot of time, and I think this is where Hopkins is today, making sure that we had an understanding that it was, in that case, Penn's self-interest to care about its community, to invest in its community, and to partner with its community. not to do things in the community, not to do things to the community, or even not to do things in a charitable sense on behalf of the community, but truly to partner in the community there. And I think that once you get there, you get to a different point, because it's real easy. I saw this in West Philadelphia. I lived there as a Penn employee, but my family goes back over a century living in the same darn house off the Penn campus. And I've told this story, and some of you may have heard it, that my grandfather, after my grandmother passed away, I lived there when I went to law school at Penn. And without fail, a guy who went to 3rd grade and never got beyond it was proud that his grandson was going to Penn, Ivy League institution. But he never without fail reminded me what those SOBs did when they tore down his family's house to make way for the Palestra, which was 65 years before. But then you talk to my grandfather about Dr. Sylvester across the street, or all the other neighbors who were from Penn, or who had connections from Penn, and he took on a different tone and a different demeanor, and it was a different set of relationships. Everyone who's involved in East Baltimore from the Penn and from the Hopkins community has those sets of relationships. What we've got to do a better job is leveraging them, connecting them, and strengthening them. And then I think this conversation about what is the role of Hopkins becomes a much more interesting question to answer, because it'll be based more upon the promise of the future and building upon actual results, as opposed to the past and sort of past grievances that we all might have in a relationship that dates back 150 years.
I think you said everything.
My name is Leon Purnell. I'm director of a program here in East Baltimore called the Men's Center. A couple of questions, and you all are going to probably have to divide it because it's going to cross the gamut. One is, you mentioned that you couldn't go to the blighted areas and start there and then build out. Only because after seeing several urban renewal programs like Model City, the Urban Renewal Project of East Baltimore, the HEBCAC redevelopment, and all of them dealt with the property. None of them dealt with the people. And that's why you couldn't do it that way. And not saying that your way is the only way, you know, that it could work, because if you dealt with the people as well as the property, and you rehabilitated some of the people, it would eliminate a lot of the problems. What happened with the EBDI that I saw as a problem was that many of the problems from this area was relocated to other areas in the city. And I said that in the beginning of the process when we had the Murettes and everything, that we needed to address these people, try to make them whole, so no matter where they go, they could be productive citizens. And that was not done, and I think that's one of the mistakes that was made. There have been a lot of improvements since then, because y'all, I guess you saw some of the things that went wrong. And I'm hoping that the other areas don't get caught up in that. We need to address the problems of the citizens as well as the property. The other piece is the programs that are in these areas. Every urban renewal program that came in there said they were going to help strengthen those programs that were in those communities, and we have yet to see that. Each year we hear that Hopkins puts $10 million into the community, and I swear, I've lived in East Baltimore my entire life. I've worked here almost my entire life. And, you know, I'm wondering if it's in the buildings that are being built, I can understand it. But if you're saying you're putting it in the community and it's supposed to be supporting the efforts of the citizens that live here, I don't see it. And, you know, I ask people, show me, you know, just show me, and I'll be one of your strongest advocates. The next time we have anything, I'll stand up and say, I saw it. And I'll be saying, yes, we can, because I believe it then. But, you know, truthfully, now we have so many people that we deal with at the Men's Center that have substance abuse problems. We have people knocking at the door every day now that are hungry. Reverend Miles brought up something that was so true. There are so many people here that want to work and can't work because they have a record. How long are they going to have to pay for something they did? I had a fella that was denied a job. He had a record 14 years ago. He worked for Hopkins for 12 years and lost his job. He got another job. I got it for him in Laurel. They let him go after he worked there for a month because they got his background check. And do you know what he had on his record? It was misdemeanors. Most of the stuff after we expunged his record, 3 of them was no processes. So this man lost his livelihood because of an ugly record that wasn't addressed. So, you know, I don't know who's going to answer those questions, and we are open for some assistance in the care community with some greening projects that we have going on. We also need funding for the Men's Center because we help the people in this area, and I can show you.
I can't speak for Hopkins, but I agree with you that any effort to revitalize a neighborhood has to be really a community organizing effort. It has to address more than just housing. And again, I said when I spoke that that was a bit of a failing in Sandtown, that we did not do more in terms of building community. But we did organize the community so that that community is now organized to help fend for itself, and in those terms be able to keep out unnecessary crime and things of that nature. The BUILD organization has been in the spearhead of saying that any effort in Baltimore to redevelop Baltimore has to be also a project of redeveloping and providing much needed services as an overall strategy for creating community. We led the effort. We put on the agenda drug treatment on demand back in the 1999 election. We've been in the forefront of pushing for living wage jobs when the city promised that the jobs in Ann Arbor would be living wage jobs, and they turned out to be seasonal, part-time, and minimum wage. So we've been constantly pushing on the corporate community in that vein, and that's why we're saying that Hopkins, more than any other institution in this city, can model the behavior that the corporate community would then be forced to follow. If Hopkins took the leadership of saying, we're no longer going to hold people's 20-year-old criminal record against them if they come to us for employment, we're going to be in the leadership of creating after-school demanding of the city that it creates after-school programs. We're going to be in the forefront of coalescing the corporate community around creating summer employment for youth and year-round employment for youth. Then we begin to see some real substantive change that moves beyond brick and mortar to impacting the things that impact communities.
If I might, I agree with the need for these programs, and I think that there's absolutely a requirement for us to do even more, and finding those resources is going to be an ongoing, continuing challenge. If I might, though, I would respectfully differ with you, Mr. Purnell. This is not the first time you and I have had this, right? I think that while we started out focused on buildings, we quickly got around to the human component. And I see former Councilwoman, I think she's probably happier with that title, former, in front of her, Johnson Branch, nodding her head, because we spent a lot of time and effort on that. And as you know, we have family advocates who work with each individual family, and they work with them from the beginning of the process for 5 years after they've relocated. And they take folks where they are. You know, you're right. For some families, a substance abuse issue presents itself, and that destabilizes the family and the neighborhood. And for some, they might be returning or ex-offenders, and we've got a series of programs for that, but we go beyond that. For some, it might be access to transportation. It might be the need for them to go back and get a GED, or in some cases, just get their name out in front of the right people because they've got all the educational credentials, they've got a clean record, they don't have a substance abuse issue, and just because they're from East Baltimore, they don't fit the stereotype that some folks have about East Baltimore. And that's an important part of this as well. I think that at the end of the day, we're going to be judged on an individual, household by household level, and that's what we've been slogging away trying to do. But I think also that you're right, we've got to figure out a way to leverage more in the way of resources, because not everybody wants to invest in EBDI. It might seem that way in terms of announcements, and we're very thankful for the support we've gotten from Johns Hopkins and the Casey Foundation, the Weinberg Foundation, and others. But there are others who are interested in the work that your organization is doing, or the work that Ed's organization is doing, or Build, or others, that we've got to figure out how to attract those resources here to do more around these specific areas. It's going to be an ongoing challenge. I would also add the following, is that on this issue of unsettling influence, I don't believe it. And I'll tell you why. Because we've got the family advocates working with families. The majority, overwhelming majority of folks who live in East Baltimore were good, honest, hardworking, law-abiding citizens. And they got impacted by our work, so they had to relocate. In the context of that, we also have to be mindful that we had the Chapel NDP project all just go and be vacated. We had 2 housing projects here all get vacated. And those kind of supports that EBDI is fortunate to have the partners to provide weren't accessible to those individuals. We've got to take the work that we're doing and make sure that's a model for others going forward. And on the opposite side, we got to figure out a better way, because people are going to be moving throughout the city, for strong communities to welcome newcomers, to have an understanding about community standards, because strong communities have standards. That's why they're strong. And make sure that newcomers feel welcome, but at the same time that they don't feel like they're being put off by the old-timers who have been there for a long time. I think that's possible based upon my recent conversations with the folks up in Bel Air Edison. But that's a whole different set of issues that we're just beginning to tackle as well.
And we're over. I just want to, I'm not sure there's anybody in the room actually who's either seen Dick Gregory over at Sojourner Douglas College or is going to see him in another week or something. We actually have another university. I just want to thank President Simmons from Sojourner Douglas for being here today, who's done an enormous amount of community support, both of individuals, but in terms of educational opportunities, bringing together a different group of folks who would not show up to a Hopkins symposium, but will show up and have a very vigorous, but also intellectually stimulating and focused on outcomes and appropriate conversation. And I think as we're talking about both the community development corporations and the communities, how do we really have these joint conversations across all our institutions in the city, our faith communities, our universities, our governmental, our non-governmental, our community advocates, because I think we're only going to get the solutions when we are able to talk together. And then so hopefully, whether it's a future discussion over at Sojourner Douglas or in some of the neighborhoods where again, many of us do come, and certainly people on the panel do go and usually have those conversations in the neighborhoods, that, again, as I started off, this wasn't going to solve the situation. We hopefully clarified where there actually are some synergies, where people are singing similar sort of songs and actually building on each other's. There's obviously, people are further ahead in some areas, and I think if we're really going to be advancing Baltimore and supporting those who live in Baltimore, we need to be able to come together under multiple auspices over time, because again, the funding and the political will or other things are going to change over time. But we really need to make sure that it gets focused on in Baltimore in general and East Baltimore in particular. And I think I want to thank the people on the panel today for coming. I want to thank the audience for coming. President Simmons, thank you for you coming. And all the great work that you guys are doing over Sojourner Douglas. Thank you very much. We'll have the slides up on the Urban Health Institute website. We'll be able to get that. There's also a reception outside so people can continue the discussions.
And I do have applications.